The security alarm went off at 5 in the morning, jolting me awake. A moment later, my phone buzzed. It was my security guard. "I'm so sorry to wake you, Mr. Hale," he said, sounding nervous. "Your daughter-in-law just pulled up to the gate. She has a moving truck with her and 3 men. She's saying she owns the property now and that you're not allowed to live here anymore. Should I call the police?" "No, let her in," I replied calmly. "And make sure she signs the visitor log. Full name, time of arrival, everything." I put the phone down. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Before I tell you what happened next, if you are watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I stepped toward the window, easing the curtain back just enough to glimpse the drive below. The moving truck sat crooked across the gravel, angled like it owned the place. 3 men in worn jackets hovered near the tailgate, shifting uneasily as if they already regretted taking the job. And there she stood, wrapped in a tailored coat, hair tied in a sharp twist. Her face glowed with triumph as she tapped her phone with quick, decisive strokes. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she had already claimed victory. I watched her point toward the porch, directing the movers like an impatient stage manager. One man grabbed a dolly and trudged toward the steps. Clara thought this house belonged to her now. She imagined I would be confused, displaced, powerless. She believed she had beaten me. I let the curtain fall and turned toward the mirror above my dresser. A 60-year-old man gazed back at me, silver hair neatly combed, eyes steady, expression calm. No frantic panic. No fear. Only patience. I reached for my tablet, unlocked it, and opened the security feed. 6 camera angles, living room, kitchen, porch, driveway, each recording, time-stamped, archived. Clara had no idea her every move was being preserved. She stepped onto the porch, her heels cracking against the wood. She knocked, twice, sharp and demanding. I didn't respond. She knocked again, louder, her voice muffled through the door. "I know you're in there. Open up. This property is mine now." I set the tablet down, lifted my cold mug of tea, and took a slow sip. The bitterness tasted like quiet control. Clara had no idea what I'd set in motion the day before. But she was about to learn. To understand how we reached this moment, I need to take you back to when mornings were gentle and uncomplicated. 4 months before that knock, life looked entirely different. I had just retired from teaching biology at a high school in Denver. 30 years spent guiding restless teenagers through cells, ecosystems, and the invisible networks that sustain life. 30 years watching young minds struggle, grow, and finally flourish. When I turned in my keys, I didn't feel empty. I felt untethered in the best possible way. The cabin had been mine for over a decade, a sanctuary purchased through careful saving. It sat tucked deep in the Colorado mountains, encircled by towering pines and wildflowers, with a sweeping view of valleys that glowed gold every sunset. It wasn't a grand place. 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen with sunlight that warmed the herb pots on the sill, and a living room anchored by a stone fireplace I had learned to manage on my own. It was the kind of home where the floor creaked when the temperature dropped and you could smell rain long before it arrived. My days followed a peaceful pattern. Mornings with tea on the back porch, watching mist lift from the treetops. Afternoons tending my garden, coaxing tomatoes and rosemary through the stubborn altitude. Evenings spent reading by the fire or stitching quilts I donated to the shelter in town. I lived alone, yes, but not lonely. Solitude had become a companion, not a punishment. After decades surrounded by noise, the quiet felt earned. Still, some nights the silence pressed too tightly. Nights when I wanted a voice other than my own echoing through the cabin. On those evenings, I called my son, now named Samuel. My only child. Samuel had always been gentle, the kind of boy who brought home stray animals and insisted we help them heal. As an adult, he carried that softness with pride. He worked in tech consulting, spent weekends hiking, and called me every Sunday without fail. We were close in a steady, unforced way, like 2 people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. He visited monthly, helping with repairs and sharing a meal by the fire as we talked about everything and nothing. He was proud of the life he'd built, and I was proud of him. But Samuel had one flaw, one that had shadowed him since childhood. He trusted too easily. He saw goodness where others saw danger. I always feared someone might exploit that kindness, though I never imagined it would unfold the way it did. Late April, the snow finally gone, I was outside planting seeds in the raised beds near the shed when my phone rang. I wiped the dirt from my hands before answering. "Dad," he said, warmth in his voice, "I have something to tell you. You're finally quitting your job and becoming a park ranger?" I joked. He laughed. "Not quite. I met someone." I straightened, gripping the phone. "Someone. Her name is Clara. We've been seeing each other for a few months. I wanted to be sure before telling you. But, Dad, I'm sure. She's amazing." The excitement in his voice was unmistakable. Bright, hopeful, the kind that tightened my chest with both joy and warning. "Tell me about her," I said softly. He began describing her in glowing detail. She was bright, he said, driven, the kind of woman who carried her ambitions with ease. In this version, her name is Clara. She worked in private finance, managing portfolios for clients who trusted her with their futures. She had grown up along the East Coast before eventually moving to Denver for better opportunities. She loved hiking, mountains, fresh air, everything Samuel loved. They had met at a networking event, started talking about trails, and something between them had clicked almost instantly. "She wants to meet you," Samuel said. I told her all about the cabin, about you. She's genuinely excited. I smiled at his enthusiasm, though a small, sharp pull tightened behind my ribs. A father's instinct, perhaps. Or perhaps the unease that comes from knowing your child's heart has been placed in someone else's care. "I'd like to meet her," I told him. "Bring her up whenever it works. I'll make dinner." His relief was palpable. "Really? That's perfect. How about next weekend?" "Next weekend is fine." After we hung up, I stood in the garden for a long moment, phone in hand, mountains spreading endlessly before me. I reminded myself that worry often shadows love, that any father might feel protective when their son gives his heart away. But somewhere deeper, somewhere older, I felt the faintest ripple of concern. Samuel always saw the best in people. I had always been the one who looked for what might hide beneath the surface. I went back to pressing seeds into cool soil, whispering quiet hopes that Clara would be every good thing Samuel believed she was. That I would not find myself needing to shield him from the very person he was learning to cherish. But hope, I had learned, was not certain. And certainty was something I intended to find on my own. Saturday arrived warm, clear, and bright enough to eat outdoors. I spent the morning preparing, not out of anxiety, but out of respect. When their car rolled into the drive, everything was set. When Samuel climbed out, he looked lighter than he had in months, a man carrying joy instead of burdens. He waved and opened the passenger door. That was when I first saw her, Clara. Tall, striking, with dark hair that fell in flawless waves. She wore a cream sweater and expensive-looking jeans. Her smile was wide and brilliant, and yet rehearsed. She extended her hand toward me. "Mr. Hale," she said warmly, taking my hand. "It's such an honor to finally meet you. Samuel talks about you constantly." Her look was firm, confident, and lingered on me just a fraction longer than necessary, as though she was evaluating me. "Call me Victor," I said. "It's good to meet you too." Samuel wrapped an arm around her waist, grinning. "Dad, isn't this place amazing?" I was telling Clara about the view. "It's stunning," Clara said, her gaze already sweeping past me toward the door. "This home is incredible. You must feel so lucky to have a place like this." There it was, that word. Lucky. Not earned. Not built. Lucky, as though I had stumbled into 30 years of work without effort. I ignored the slight. "Come in. Dinner's nearly ready." Coming inside, Clara's eyes traveled across the living room with calculation. She noted the fireplace, the hand-refinished furniture, the shelves lined with books, the framed photos of Samuel's childhood. "This is charming," she said with bright admiration. It feels like something from a magazine. She drifted to the mantel, touching a frame that held a photo of Samuel and me atop a mountain peak years ago, sunburned and grinning. You two look so happy. We were, I answered, watching her carefully. She turned, smiling again with polished warmth. Samuel told me this property has been in your family for a while. With the market rising, it must be worth a lot now. I saw Samuel shift uncomfortably beside her. I kept my voice steady. It's worth whatever peace is worth. I don't measure it in dollars. Clara nodded, though something flickered briefly in her eyes, curiosity or calculation. Of course, she said. It's just such a valuable retreat. Dinner unfolded pleasantly on the surface. Clara praised everything, the roast, the bread, the wine. She asked polite questions about my year's teaching, laughed in the right places, and touched Samuel's arm with gentle affection. But beneath her charm, I noticed things. I paid close attention to Clara's behavior throughout the evening, noting the small things. The way her eyes drifted toward the corners of the room whenever she thought no one was observing, as if she were cataloging exits or valuables. The way she straightened the napkin on her lap 3 times before settling, a gesture that spoke more of control than nervousness. Even her questions carried an edge, wrapped politely but pushed just a bit too far. Over dessert she asked, "Have you ever considered moving closer to the city? Living up here alone must be difficult, especially during winter." "I manage just fine," I told her. "Solitude suits me better than crowds." "But don't you worry about emergencies? Medical situations?" she pressed, glancing at Samuel. Samuel chimed in gently, "Dad, she only means you're getting to the age where those things matter." The age. There it was again, another subtle nudge disguised as concern. Samuel shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. "My dad's tougher than anyone I know," he added quickly. "He doesn't need to worry about that yet." Clara placed her hand over his, smiling warmly. "Of course. I only mean that planning ahead is part of what I do. It's important to make sure people are protected." She turned that smile toward me. "I'd love to help you organize things, Victor, just to ensure everything is in order for Samuel's sake." I set my fork down carefully and met her eyes. "That's kind of you, Clara. But I've always handled my own affairs. I'm very particular about how things are done." She didn't flinch or retreat. She only nodded and lifted her wineglass. "I understand completely." But she didn't. I saw it in the tightness of her jaw, the faint tapping of her fingers against the stem of the glass. Clara wasn't used to being told no. After dinner we stepped onto the porch. The mountains glowed orange and pink under the setting sun. Samuel excused himself to take a call, leaving Clara and me alone for the first time. She leaned against the railing, silent for a moment, studying the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more measured. "Samuel is lucky to have a father who cares so much about him." "I'm the lucky one," I replied. She glanced at me, and for a moment the warmth in her expression thinned, revealing something colder. "He deserves someone who can take care of him," she said. "Someone who can make sure he isn't burdened by things he doesn't need to carry." "He has never been burdened by me," I answered steadily. Clara smiled again, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Before she could say more, Samuel returned, and the moment dissolved. Samuel hugged me tightly while Clara waved from the car. I remained on the porch long after the taillights vanished. Clara smiled too much when she was calculating. 3 weeks later Samuel called and told me they were engaged. His voice tumbled with excitement, a proposal at a restaurant overlooking the city. I congratulated him with all the love a father could give. But when we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, feeling the first real tug of worry. Samuel saw only the woman he loved. I had seen something else. The wedding came quickly. Too quickly. A small ceremony in Denver, tasteful and elegant. Clara looked radiant in her simple white dress, and Samuel looked at her like she had captured every light in the room. I smiled through their vows. I toasted their future. I danced with my son and told him I loved him. But driving back to the cabin that night, I felt the weight of knowing things would never be the same. I was right. Within a month, the calls from Samuel grew less frequent. Sunday calls became every other week, then once a month. His texts shortened, trimmed as if edited before sending. And when we did speak, I noticed something else. His words didn't sound like his own. "Dad," he said one evening, "Clara thinks you should consider getting a medical alert system, just in case something happens when you're alone." I paused. "Something like what?" "You know, a fall or a health issue." "She's just worried about you." "I'm 62, not 90, I reminded him. "I'm in excellent health." "I know. But a safety net wouldn't hurt." I bit back the urge to remind him I had lived independently for years. Instead, I said, "I'll think about it." But I didn't. Clara's suggestion had nothing to do with worry. A week later he called again. "Clara was wondering if you've thought about updating your will. She says it's important to keep those things current." There it was again. My age, wrapped in concern but sharp underneath. "My will is fine," I said. "I updated it 2 years ago with my lawyer." "Right. But Clara says documents should be reviewed regularly. She works with estates all the time. She could help." "I don't need help," I said gently. "But I appreciate the thought." I knew those words hadn't been his. They were Clara's, spoken through him, shaping him slowly. And that realization settled heavily, like the first cold wind of winter pushing down the mountains. I felt the silence stretch across the phone, a long, tense pause where I could almost hear Samuel wrestling with himself. He was caught between the man who had raised him and the woman who was slowly reshaping the way he thought. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller. "Okay," he said. "Just let me know if you change your mind." We hung up, and I sat alone as dusk settled over the cabin, the quiet feeling heavier than usual. It wasn't my son's voice I'd heard. Not really. Those were Clara's words, wearing his tone like a borrowed coat. Then she began visiting. The first time, she showed up unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. I heard the car before I saw it, the slow purr of the engine rolling up the gravel drive. When I opened the door, she stood there with a bakery box tied neatly with string, her smile polished to perfection. "Victor," she said warmly, "I hope you don't mind. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by." "In the area" was a lie. My cabin was nearly 40 minutes from the main road, and no one passed by unless they meant to. Still, I stepped aside. "Come in." She placed the box on the counter, opening it to reveal pastries I hadn't asked for or wanted. "I thought we could have tea," she said, already moving through the kitchen like she lived there. She found the kettle, opened drawers looking for spoons, touched everything with a familiarity that made me bristle. "You have such a lovely home," she added, her gaze drifting across the room. "But maintaining a place this size must be exhausting on your own." "I've managed for over a decade." "Of course," she said lightly, "but you're not getting any younger. Samuel worries about you constantly." Her tone was gentle, but the message was anything but. I'd spent 30 years teaching teenagers. Performances didn't fool me. Clara was acting, and she expected applause. Her visits continued. Every week or two, she'd appear with some excuse, dropping off groceries I never requested, commenting on repairs I didn't need, asking pointed questions about my routines. She moved through the cabin like she was assessing it, touching picture frames, counting cabinets, measuring with her eyes. Each visit left a film of discomfort behind, the sense that she was gathering data, building a case. Then came the paperwork. One warm afternoon in late June, she arrived carrying a slim leather folder tucked under her arm. She set it on the table with a soft thud and offered a solemn smile. "I've been working on something that I think will make your life easier," she said. I didn't touch the folder. She opened it anyway, sliding out neatly printed forms filled with highlighted sections and sticky tabs. "This is a simple financial consolidation form. It allows Samuel to help manage your bills and property taxes. Everything stays in your name, of course. It just streamlines things." I scanned the first page. Authorization clauses, power of access lines, signatures required in multiple places. I don't need help managing my finances, I said evenly. Her smile tightened. I understand. But wouldn't it be nice to have one less thing to worry about? Samuel only wants to make sure you're protected. Protected from what? I asked. Well, she said gently, in case of an emergency. Or if your memory starts, you know. She gave a soft, sympathetic smile. It happens to everyone eventually. That was the moment I saw her clearly. Not the charm, not the sweetness. The calculation. The positioning. I'll need time to review this with my lawyer, I said, closing the folder and sliding it back toward her. For the briefest second, something sharp flashed across her face. Then the smile returned, softer and falsely patient. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll leave the folder here for you. She stood, smoothing her blouse. I'll check in next week. When she left, I stared at the folder on the table for a long time. I didn't open it again. I already knew what it contained. This wasn't about easing my life. Clara was inventorying, cataloging, preparing for something she hadn't said aloud yet. July brought a heat that shimmered across the mountains. I spent mornings tending the garden, watering the tomatoes before the sun rose too high. It was during one of those mornings that I realized something else had shifted, something outside my home. My neighbor, Margaret Crowley, lived half a mile down the road. We weren't close, but we'd always been friendly. She often stopped to chat when passing, asking about my garden, sharing extra squash or eggs. But that morning, when her truck rumbled up the road, I waved like always. She looked directly at me, hesitated, and kept driving. No smile. No wave. Nothing. I stood among the rows of basil and tomatoes, dirt on my hands, feeling something cold run through me. Margaret had never ignored me. Not once in the 10 years I'd lived here. 2 days later, I drove into town for groceries. The store was small, the kind where everyone knew each other. I'd shopped there since buying the cabin, chatted with the clerks, caught up with neighbors in the aisles. But that day, I felt eyes lingering a beat too long. Conversations quieted when I walked by. A woman I'd known for years gave me a stiff smile instead of her usual warm greeting. As I moved through the store, placing the same items in my basket as always, a strange awareness settled in, the sense that I had become the subject of conversations I wasn't part of. The subject of assumptions I hadn't invited. When I reached the checkout, the cashier, Tom, usually cheerful, gave me a polite but cautious nod. "Afternoon, Mr. Hale," he said, bagging my items slower than usual. "Everything all right?" I asked. He hesitated. "Sure. Yeah. Just long day." But he didn't meet my eyes. On the drive home, the road stretching out in a familiar ribbon of gravel and pine, I felt it again, that shift, that quiet undercurrent in the people around me. As though Clara's influence had seeped beyond Samuel, reaching places I hadn't expected. As though a narrative was being shaped without my knowledge. I didn't know the details yet, but I could feel it, the way animals sense a coming storm long before the clouds gather. Something was moving, and it had Clara's fingerprints all over it. The cashier, a young woman named Lena, always asked about my garden and told me about her kids. But that afternoon, the moment I stepped up to the register, something was different. Her smile was polite, but distant. She didn't meet my eyes. She scanned my items. Tea, flour, a sack of potatoes, with quick, mechanical movements, and when I tried to make conversation, she gave one-word answers and kept glancing toward the back of the store. "Is everything all right?" I asked gently. She looked up surprised, then forced a thin smile. "Oh, yes. Just busy today." But the store was nearly empty, and we both knew it. I paid and carried my bags to the car. With every step, a slow, uneasy sensation crept up my spine. Something was shifting around me, something I didn't understand yet. It wasn't until the following week that I understood. I was at the post office mailing a package to an old colleague when I overheard two women talking near the bulletin board. I didn't recognize them, but they were speaking just loud enough for their voices to carry. "I heard he's getting forgetful," one of them whispered. "His daughter-in-law said he leaves the stove on and forgets to lock her doors." "That's terrible. How old is he?" "No idea, but old enough that he shouldn't be living alone." I froze. The package still in my hands. They were talking about me. I turned slowly and both women glanced over. Their faces shifted from casual gossip to embarrassed recognition. One of them offered a tight smile before they both hurried out the door. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I just heard, forgetful, leaving the stove on, forgetting to lock doors. None of it was true. Not a single word. Clara had been here, spreading stories. I drove home a few days later, gripping the steering wheel harder than I needed to. My thoughts raced through every conversation I'd had with neighbors, every small interaction in town. How many people had she talked to? How many lies had she slipped into their ears? And for what reason? That evening, I called Samuel. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to explain what I'd heard without sounding paranoid. "Son, I think Clara has been saying things about me around town, things that aren't true." There was a pause. "What kind of things?" "That I'm forgetful. That I leave the stove on. That I shouldn't be living alone." He sighed, and I heard the exhaustion in it. "Dad, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Clara cares about you. She was probably just expressing concern and people twisted it." "Samuel, she's telling people I'm losing my memory." "I'm not." "I know you're not," he said. His voice was careful, measured, the tone you use when you're trying to calm someone you think is overreacting. "Maybe you're reading too much into it. Clara mentioned you seemed a little confused last time she visited." My chest tightened. "Confused about what?" "She said you couldn't remember where you'd put some documents she left for you, and that you asked her the same question twice." I sat silently, replaying that visit. I hadn't been confused. I'd refused to sign her papers and tucked them away on purpose, and I hadn't repeated a single question. She was lying to my own son. "That didn't happen," I said quietly. "Dad, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm just saying maybe you didn't realize it. It's not a big deal. Everyone forgets things sometimes." And there it was, the shift. He was defending her, believing her story over mine. "I'm not forgetting things, Samuel." "Okay, I believe you. Just, I don't know. Keep an eye on it for me." We hung up soon after, and I sat in the dimming light of my living room feeling something I hadn't felt in years: betrayal. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet kind that creeps in and makes you wonder if you're the one who's wrong. Was I imagining things? Misreading them? Forgetting things without noticing? For the next few days, I double-checked everything, locking the doors, writing down conversations so I could prove to myself I wasn't slipping. But then I noticed something else: inconsistencies. Clara told Samuel I'd misplaced documents, but I'd never taken them out of the folder, so how could they have gone missing? She told people I forgot to lock my doors, but my cabin's security system logged every time a door opened or closed. I checked the logs. Every door had been locked, every single time. She said I'd left the stove on, but I had an electric stove with an automatic shut-off. It was impossible for it to stay on for more than an hour. The lies were small enough to seem believable, but specific enough that I could disprove each one. She wasn't confused. She was crafting a story. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She was building a narrative that painted me as forgetful, incapable, unable to care for myself. So when the moment came, no one would question her stepping in. That Friday afternoon, I went to check my mail and found an envelope addressed to Hale Family LLC. The address was my cabin, but I'd never heard of any Hale Family LLC. I'd never registered a company. Never signed anything like that. I turned the envelope over, my pulse quickening. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from a property management firm in Denver, thanking Hale Family LLC for their inquiry about estate consolidation services. My hands trembled as I read the letter again. Someone had created a company using my family name, using my address, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who was behind it. I walked back to the cabin slowly, the envelope still clenched in my hand, my mind already turning over the implications. Clara wasn't just spreading rumors. She was assembling something step by step, a structure, a legal shell she could use to shift ownership, gather assets, take control. She was preparing to take everything. And she assumed I wouldn't realize it until it was too late. I stood in my study staring at the envelope, and something settled inside me. The doubt was gone. The second-guessing, the wondering if I was imagining things, it vanished. I wasn't imagining anything. She was coming for my home, and I was going to put a stop to it. The next morning, I called Ruth Bennett. Ruth had been my lawyer for about 15 years, ever since I bought the cabin and needed someone to manage the paperwork. She was in her late 50s, sharp as a blade, with cropped silver hair and a no-nonsense approach to life. She didn't waste time. She didn't sugarcoat. She'd earned my trust by always being direct, even when what she had to say wasn't pleasant. "Victor," she answered on the second ring. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need to see you as soon as possible," I told her. "Something's going on, and I need legal advice." There was a brief pause. Ruth knew me well enough to know I didn't panic easily. "Can you come by this afternoon? 2 o'clock. I'll be there." I drove to Denver that morning, the envelope from Hale Family LLC resting on the passenger seat beside me. After weeks in the mountains, the city felt too loud, nothing but traffic, concrete, and people rushing everywhere. I parked near Ruth's building and rode the elevator to the 4th floor, where her office overlooked the street below. She met me at the door, took one look at my face, and gestured toward her desk. "Sit. Tell me everything." So, I did. I started with Clara's visit right after the wedding, the way she'd walked through my home like she was taking inventory. I told Ruth about the financial consolidation papers, the rumors moving through town, the way Samuel's words had started echoing hers. Then I placed the envelope on her desk. "This arrived yesterday," I said. "I've never created a company. I've never signed anything about estate consolidation, but someone has." Ruth picked up the envelope, examined the letterhead, and pulled out the documents. Her expression stayed steady, but her jaw tightened as she read. "Tell me about your daughter-in-law," she said, eyes still on the letter. "Her work, her background, everything you know." I repeated what Samuel had shared, that Clara worked in finance managing private portfolios, had moved to Denver from the East Coast, and positioned herself as someone knowledgeable about estates and asset management. Ruth set the letter down and folded her hands. "Victor, what you're describing is a pattern, and it's one I've seen before." "What kind of pattern?" I asked. She leaned back, her gaze steady. "Family financial exploitation. It usually starts with gaining trust, then slowly taking control. They spread doubt about the person's competency, isolate them from people who might notice, and then begin shifting assets, often using legal structures that look legitimate from the outside." My stomach tightened. "Like creating a company in my name." "Exactly. If she gets your signature on the right documents, she can move your property into that company. Once it's under the LLC, she can claim she's managing it for you. And if you're considered incompetent, which is why she's been spreading these rumors, a judge might allow her to keep managing it even without your permission." I sat quietly, absorbing the weight of her words. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a gossip. It was a deliberate plan to take everything I owned. "Can we stop her?" I asked. "We won't stop her. We're going to let her think she succeeded," she said. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "If we confront her now, she'll back off and change tactics. She'll become careful. But if she thinks she's winning, she'll get careless. She'll make mistakes. And when she does, we'll have everything we need to expose what she's been doing." "You want me to let her keep going?" "Not quite. I want you to appear cooperative while we build a defense she won't see coming. We'll protect your assets in ways she won't notice. We'll record every lie, every forged document, every illegal move. And when the time is right, we'll have a case so airtight she won't be able to talk her way out of it." Something cold and focused stirred inside me. Not fear, not anger, something sharper. What do we need to do? Ruth began writing quickly. First, we transfer your property into a revocable living trust. You'll be the grantor and the trustee, which means you keep full control, but the property won't be in your individual name anymore. Any documents she files trying to claim ownership will be worthless. Will she know? I asked. Not if we file it properly. We'll request a quiet title action. That seals the record. Anyone checking the public database will see the property in a transitional legal state. It'll look like it's in limbo. And that's exactly what we want her to assume. I nodded slowly, understanding her strategy. What else? We document everything, she said. Every conversation, every visit, every piece of paperwork she brings you. If she was forging signatures, we needed the original documents to prove I'd never signed anything. And Ruth said she would run a background check on the notary Clara had supposedly used. If the stamp turned out to be fake, that would be fraud, and we could press charges. And if she tries to force me out of my home? I asked. Ruth looked up, her eyes sharp. Then we'll have her trespassing, attempted theft, and elder exploitation. But Victor, for this plan to work, you need to play along. If she brings more paperwork, don't refuse outright. Stall her. Tell her you need time. Let her believe you're considering it. The longer she thinks she's in control, the more evidence we'll collect. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what we were constructing. This wasn't just protection, it was a trap. One Clara would walk in willingly, because she believed I was too old, too trusting, too easy to manipulate. How long will this take? I asked. A few weeks to finalize the trust and get the title sealed, she said. After that, we wait. She'll make her move eventually. And when she does, we'll be ready. I stood, picking up my coat. Thank you, Ruth. She rose as well, extending her hand. You're not a victim, Victor. Don't let her make you feel like one. You're smarter than she is. You've just been on defense. Now, we switch to offense. I shook her hand, feeling the certainty in her grip, and nodded. As I walked back to my car, the noise of the city fading behind me, something settled inside, a quiet, solid resolve. Clara believed she was playing a game I couldn't comprehend. She thought I was a lonely old man holding on to a house I couldn't manage, too stubborn to accept help, too confused to see what she was doing. She was wrong. I understood perfectly. And I would let her think she'd won, right up until the moment she realized she'd lost. I drove back toward the mountains as the sun dipped behind the peaks, coloring the sky in amber and rose. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, still proof of her intentions, but now it felt different. Not threatening. Just evidence. By the time I turned into my driveway, a plan was already forming in my mind. Let her think she's winning. And when she finally makes her move, I'll be ready. The first step happened quietly, the way effective plans usually do. 2 days after my meeting with Ruth, a courier delivered documents to her office, the ones I'd signed the previous evening. The trust paperwork was detailed, written clearly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. It listed me as both grantor and trustee, which meant I kept full authority over the property while removing it from individual ownership. Ruth filed the documents with the county recorder's office that afternoon, along with a request for a quiet title action. The request cited privacy concerns and ongoing estate planning as the reason for sealing the records. Within 48 hours, the filing was approved. Now, anyone searching public databases would see my cabin listed in an unresolved state. The ownership wouldn't appear under my name, but it wouldn't appear under anyone else's either. It would simply look pending, stuck in transition. Exactly what we needed Clara to see. Ruth called that Friday to confirm. The property is protected, she said. Anything she files will be rejected. And even if something slips through, it'll be void. The trust overrides everything. What if she notices the records changed? I asked. She won't see the trust filing, it's sealed. All she'll see is that the property seems to be in legal limbo. She'll assume you're transferring it, or that there's a bureaucratic delay. It'll push her to act faster. That's what we want. A small flicker of satisfaction warmed my chest. What's next? Now we wait for her next move, and we document everything. Do you have a way to record conversations if she comes by? I paused. Not yet. Get something. Audio and video, if possible. Colorado is a one-party consent state. You can legally record any conversation you're part of. If she brings forged papers or makes threats, we need it on record. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table running through the logistics. I wasn't exactly tech-savvy, but I wasn't helpless either. I'd managed classroom tech for years. Projectors, boards, all of it. Cameras couldn't be that different. The next morning, I drove into town and found a small electronics store wedged between a cafe and a hardware shop. The young man behind the counter looked barely out of high school, but when I explained what I needed, his face lit up. Do you want indoor security cameras? Discreet ones, I said. Nothing obvious. I need to monitor a few rooms without anyone noticing. He didn't question it. He simply nodded and led me to a shelf stocked with small devices that resembled smoke detectors. These are wireless, he said, holding one up. It was about the size of a deck of cards. They connect to your Wi-Fi and stream to an app on your phone. You can watch live or review footage later. Motion activated, night vision, audio, all of it. How many would I need for 3 rooms? Depends on the layout, but 4 or 5 should cover everything. You want clear views of faces and voices. I bought 6. Better to have too much than too little. He helped me set them up that afternoon, showing me how to position them and how to navigate the app. By evening, I had cameras set up in the living room, kitchen, front porch, and hallway. One faced the mantel where Clara always hovered. Another covered the kitchen table where she'd spread out her paperwork. The porch camera captured the front door and driveway. I tested the feeds on my tablet, watching each room switch into view. The quality was better than I expected, clear enough to read expressions, sharp enough to catch words. I felt like a student again, learning something new, except this time the stakes were far more personal than any classroom exam. Over the next week, I prepared in other quiet, methodical ways. I made copies of every document Clara had ever brought to my house, including the ones I'd refused to sign. I photographed the forged signatures on the papers I'd found, comparing them to my real one. The differences were small, but unmistakable. The slant was off, the pressure uneven. Ruth had said she would run a background check on the notary whose stamp appeared on the forged documents. I sent her photos of the seal, and she promised to follow up. I also started keeping a journal. Not a diary, more like a log. Every time Clara visited, I wrote down the date, time, and what was said. Every time Samuel called with one of her suggestions, I recorded it. Every rumor I heard around town, I noted. Patterns appeared once you wrote things down. Details you might forget became evidence. One evening, as I reviewed my notes, it struck me how much I had learned from 30 years of teaching. Patience, observation, and the ability to see through performances. Teenagers were masters at manipulation, testing limits, saying one thing while meaning another. Clara wasn't that different. Just older and more polished. But I had dealt with hundreds of students who thought they were clever enough to cheat or skip class without consequences. They all learned eventually that I noticed everything. Clara was about to learn that same lesson. By mid-August, everything was in place. The trust had been filed and sealed. The cameras were recording. My documentation was solid. Now, I just needed her to act. I didn't wait long. She called on a Thursday morning, her voice bright and insistent. "Victor, I'm coming by tomorrow. There are some new forms we need to finalize. Samuel is really hoping you'll cooperate this time. He's worried about you." I kept my tone light, almost distracted. "Tomorrow? I suppose that's fine. What time?" "Around 10. I'll bring everything. It'll only take a few minutes." After we hung up, I texted Ruth. "She's coming tomorrow. Bringing more paperwork." Ruth replied almost immediately. "Perfect. Let her talk. Record everything. Don't sign anything. That evening, I straightened up the cabin, not because it needed it, but because I needed something to occupy my hands. I checked the camera angles twice. Made sure my tablet was fully charged. Set out tea and cookies, the kind of polite touches that would make Clara think I was being agreeable. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling beams, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. A part of me still struggled to believe my son's wife, someone who should have been family, was deliberately trying to steal from me. But another part of me, the part honed by decades of watching people reveal themselves through small actions, wasn't surprised. Clara had shown me who she was from the very first visit. I had simply needed time to see it clearly. I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle, whispering into the quiet, maybe to myself, maybe to no one at all. You've overplayed your hand, Clara. Tomorrow, she would walk into my home believing she held all the power. She had no idea I'd already taken it back. Clara arrived exactly at 10 o'clock, stepping out of her car with a briefcase that looked both expensive and unnecessary. She wore a cream blazer and dark pants, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail, more like she was heading into a board meeting than visiting family. I watched her approach through the kitchen window, then opened the door before she knocked. "Good morning," I said with a warm smile. "Come in, I just put the kettle on." She hesitated a split second, caught off guard by my pleasantness, then smiled back. "Thank you, Victor. You're always so welcoming." We sat at the kitchen table, the same place she'd shown me paperwork before. I poured tea into delicate cups, offered cookies from the plate I'd arranged earlier, and let her steer the conversation. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers clipped together, each page marked with colored tabs indicating where signatures were required. "I know we've discussed this before," she began, her tone soft and patient, like she was speaking to someone fragile. "But I really think this is the best option for you. It simplifies everything. You won't have to worry about bills or taxes or any of the stresses that come with managing a home." I picked up the first page, scanning it slowly. The language was dense, filled with legal terms meant to confuse people. Transfer of asset management, irrevocable authorization power of attorney for financial decisions. "What exactly does this do?" I asked, letting my voice sound uncertain. "It just gives Samuel and me the ability to help you," she said smoothly. "Everything stays in your name, of course. We're simply handling the details so you don't have to." I looked up, letting doubt and weariness cross my face. "I don't know, Clara. This feels like a lot." "I understand it's overwhelming," she said gently. "But trust me, Victor, this really is what's best for you. Samuel wants to make sure you're taken care of. He worries about you constantly." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but it felt more like pressure. "You trust Samuel, don't you?" "Of course I do." "Then trust that he's looking out for you. We both are." I let the silence stretch for a moment, then sighed as if giving in. "Can I think about it for a day or two?" Her jaw tightened, though she kept the smile in place. "Of course. But Victor, time matters here. The longer we wait, the harder this becomes, especially if something were to happen to you." "Something like what?" I asked quietly. "An accident, a health crisis. At your age, these things can happen fast. And if we don't have these documents in place, Samuel won't be able to help you. Everything could get tied up in courts. I've seen it in other families. It's heartbreaking." I looked down at the papers again, then back up at her. "Can I keep these? I'd like to read through them more carefully." She hesitated, and I saw the calculation flicker across her eyes. If she refused, it would seem controlling. If she agreed, she risked me showing them to someone who might explain what they really meant. "Of course," she finally said. "Take all the time you need, but please don't wait too long." She stood, smoothing her blazer, and gathered her briefcase. I walked her to the door, thanked her, and watched as she drove away. The moment her car turned out of the driveway, I locked the door and went straight back to the kitchen. I checked my tablet. The cameras had captured everything. Her voice, her words, the documents she left. I spent the next hour photographing each page from multiple angles, then scanning them and sending the files to Ruth. Her response arrived within 20 minutes. "These are bad, Victor. Very bad. Do not sign anything. I'm reviewing them now." That evening, Ruth called. Her voice was tight, edged with controlled anger. "Those documents are designed to strip you of all financial independence. If you signed them, she would control everything. She could sell your property, drain your accounts. You'd have no legal way to stop her. But she said everything would stay in my name." "That's a lie. The fine print transfers ownership to the LLC she created. Once the property goes under that entity, she controls it. Not you. Not Samuel. Her." I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of how close I had come to losing everything. What do I do now? Wait. Don't confront her, and don't let her know you're aware of this. Keep stalling. Tell her you need more time. I'll keep building the case. 3 days later, something arrived in the mail that made my blood run cold. Another letter from the property management firm, this time addressed directly to me. Inside was a welcome packet thanking me for enrolling in their estate program and confirming that ownership documents had been received and filed. I called Ruth immediately. "I never signed anything," I said, my voice shaking. "But they're saying they have my signature. Scan it and send it to me right now." I did, my hands shaking as I photographed the form. At the bottom was my signature. Except it wasn't. The spacing was wrong, the loops uneven, the slant too sharp. Close, but not mine. Ruth called back within the hour. She forged it. "And look at the notary seal. See that registration number?" I checked it. "That notary doesn't exist. The stamp is fake." I stared at the document, feeling something cold settle inside my chest. This wasn't manipulation anymore. This was a fraud. Criminal fraud. "What do we do?" I asked. "We document it. We keep the original. And we wait for her to use it. When she does, we'll have everything needed to press charges." That night, I stood on the porch in the darkness, looking toward the mountains, bare shadows against the sky. The air was cool, scented with pine and earth. I'd spent my whole career teaching students to think critically, to question what they heard, to look for evidence before reaching conclusions. Now, I was using those same skills to protect myself from someone who believed I was too old and too trusting to fight back. I went inside, pulled the stepladder from the closet, and carried it outside. I still had one more camera in its box. I climbed the ladder carefully, positioned the camera above the porch light where it had a clear view of anyone approaching the door, and secured it in place. Then I climbed down, folded the ladder, and brought it back inside. If Clara returned, and I knew she would, every step she took would be recorded. Every word. Every action. Every lie. And when the time came, there would be no doubt about what she'd done. The following Tuesday, I called Samuel. My voice stayed casual, relaxed, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "Son, I'm thinking about spending a few days with Barbara. You remember her, right? We taught together for years. She has that ranch outside Boulder." "That sounds nice, Dad," Samuel said. "When are you going?" "Tomorrow, probably. Just for 3 or 4 days. I need a change of scenery." There was a pause. I could almost hear him relaying the information to someone in the background. Then he came back on the line. "That's great. You should get out more. Do you need help with anything before you go?" "No, I'm fine. I'll call you when I get back." "Okay. Have fun." We hung up, and I sat there looking at the phone, knowing exactly what would happen next. Within an hour, Clara would know I'd be gone, and she'd see it as an opportunity. I didn't actually drive to Barbara's ranch. I'd considered it for a moment, but decided against it. If something happened while I was truly gone, I wouldn't be able to respond quickly. Instead, I left early the next morning, parked my car at a friend's house a few streets over, and walked back through the woods to my cabin. I slipped in through the back door, locked it behind me, and moved quietly through the house, closing curtains and pulling down shades. From the outside, the place would look empty, dark and unused. Then I settled into the back bedroom, the one without a camera, and opened my tablet. The 6 camera feeds glowed on the screen, each one showing a different part of my home. The living room, kitchen, front porch, hallway. Everything was still. Silent. Waiting. I made myself tea, kept the lights off, and waited. The first day passed without anything happening. I read by the small lamp, ate the meals I'd prepared ahead of time, and checked the feeds every hour. Nothing. The second day was the same. Quiet, uneventful. But on the third day, right at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the motion sensor triggered. I looked down at the tablet and felt my pulse jump. A car was coming up the driveway. Her car. I watched as Clara parked near the steps, got out, and looked around carefully. She was alone. No Samuel, no witnesses. She walked to the front door and knocked twice, then waited. When no one answered, she knocked again, louder this time, calling out, "Victor, are you home?" I stayed absolutely still in the back bedroom, barely breathing as I watched her on the screen. She tried the door, locked. Then she stepped back, pulled out her phone, and made a call. I couldn't hear her from where I sat, but I could see the shift in her expression, casual to focused. After a moment she ended the call and walked around the side of the house. I switched camera views, following her. She peered through windows, tried the side door, and checked the garage. Then she went back to her car, opened the trunk, and took something out. A small metal lockbox. My stomach tightened. She walked back to the front door, knelt, and opened the box. Inside was a key, my spare key, the one I'd kept hidden under a fake rock by the garden shed. She had found it, or more likely, taken it weeks earlier during a visit. I watched her slide the key into the lock, turn it, and step inside. The living room camera caught her perfectly. She paused in the doorway, glanced around, then closed the door behind her and walked deeper into the house. "Empty," she muttered, her voice clear through the microphone. "Good. Finally." She walked to the mantel, running her fingers over the framed photos like she had the first time she visited. But there was no pretend admiration now. She picked up the picture of Samuel and me, studied it briefly, then set it face down. "You've had long enough," she whispered. "This is mine now." She moved into the kitchen, opening drawers, checking cabinets. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She was familiarizing herself, learning the space like she already owned it. Then she pulled out her phone and began taking photos of everything. The living room, kitchen, hallway. Documentation. She was preparing to list the property, or show it to someone. Proof that she had access and control. She paused at the kitchen table where I'd left a small stack of mail as if I'd just stepped away. She picked up an envelope, opened it, read the contents, and smiled. "Still paying bills like you own the place," she murmured. "Not for much longer." She spent another 20 minutes inside, moving through rooms, opening closets, taking notes on her phone. At one point, she stood in the middle of the living room with an expression of satisfaction. "This is going to sell for a fortune," she said softly. "And he'll never see a cent of it." Then she left, locking the door behind her and returning the key to the lockbox. She drove away as calmly as she'd arrived, as if she'd simply checked on a property she had every right to enter. I sat in the back bedroom, my hands trembling, staring at the tablet. I had it. All of it. Her breaking in, claiming ownership, saying outright that she planned to sell my home. I immediately sent the footage to Ruth with a message. She just broke in. Recorded everything. Ruth responded within seconds. "Don't move. Don't confront her. Stay put. I'm contacting the sheriff now." I waited. The rest of the day crawled by. I stayed hidden, watching the cameras, replaying the footage to make sure every angle was clear. Her face, her voice, her actions. Everything was there. Undeniable. I tried to sleep, but every sound jolted me awake. Every creak made me check the cameras, but nothing moved. The feeds stayed still. At 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. I expected a message from Ruth. Instead, it was a motion alert from the front porch camera. I opened the app, my heart pounding, just as headlights appeared at the edge of the driveway. Not one vehicle, two. And behind them, a moving truck. I didn't panic. Panic only clouds judgment. And judgment was the one thing I had left. The security alarm had already gone off, a single sharp tone that cut through the pre-dawn quiet. My phone lit up, flashing the name. Mike. Security. I answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hale, I'm so sorry to wake you," Mike said, his voice tight with nerves. "Your daughter-in-law just showed up at the gate. She's got a moving truck and 3 men with her. She's saying she owns the property now and that you're supposed to be gone." I pushed myself up in bed, propped a pillow behind my back, and kept my voice steady. "What exactly did she say?" "She said you transferred the property to her yesterday, that she has the deed, and you agreed to move out. She's insisting I let her through." "Did you ask to see the paperwork?" I asked. "Yes, sir. She showed me something, but I don't know if it's legit. It looks official, but I've never seen anything like it." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. This was it, the moment everything had been leading to. "Let her in, Mike. But make sure she signs the visitor log. Full name, time of arrival. Have her write the reason for her visit." "Sir, are you sure?" "If she doesn't really have permission, I should call the police." "The police are already aware of the situation," I said calmly. "Let her in. I'll handle it from here." "Okay, if you're sure." "I'm sure." I ended the call and reached for my tablet on the nightstand. The screen came to life, showing all 6 camera feeds. I switched to the driveway view and watched as Mike opened the gate. The moving truck rumbled in first, followed by Clara's sleek sedan. Behind them, a third vehicle. A man I didn't recognize climbed out and joined Clara as she walked up to my porch. I switched to the front porch camera and turned up the volume. She was dressed like she was heading into a negotiation, not visiting family. Dark slacks, tailored jacket, heels tapping against the wooden steps. Her expression was confident, almost glowing. She truly believed she'd won. One of the movers walked up to her, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some documentation before we start loading." "Standard policy." Clara waved a hand dismissively. "I have everything. The deed was transferred yesterday. The property is mine. The previous owner is already gone." Previous owner. The phrase sent a cold shiver through me, but I kept watching. "Do you have keys?" another mover asked. She pulled the key from her purse, the one she'd taken weeks ago, and held it up like a trophy. "Right here. Now let's get started. I want everything out by noon." The movers hesitated, exchanging uneasy looks, but she was already unlocking the door and stepping inside. I switched to the living room feed. She entered confidently, flipping on the lights without hesitation. She moved through the room as though she'd been living there for years, pointing at furniture and giving orders. "Start with the bedroom, the bed, the dresser, all of it. Then the living room. I want the couch, the chairs, everything." "What about personal items?" one of the men asked. "Photos, books, that kind of thing?" "Box it all up. I'll go through it later. Most of it's probably worthless anyway." She walked to the mantel and picked up the photo of Samuel and me, the same one she'd turned face down days earlier. She stared at it for a moment, her expression unreadable, then set it aside. "She should have just signed the papers when I asked," she muttered. "Would have been easier for everyone." One of the movers stepped into the living room, looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm not sure about this. If the previous owner didn't authorize this move, we could be liable." Clara turned sharply toward him. "The previous owner signed over the property. I have the deed right here." She pulled a folder from her bag and opened it, showing him documents stamped with official-looking seals and signatures, my forged signature. "See? Everything's legal. Please get to work." The mover nodded reluctantly and headed toward the bedroom. I checked the time. 4:58 a.m. Ruth had told me an officer would be patrolling this area at dawn. "Routine," she'd said. Nothing suspicious. Just perfectly timed. I switched back to the driveway camera and waited. Minutes dragged by. I watched Clara directing the movers, pointing at items, typing into her phone. She was meticulous, organized, absolutely certain everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. At 5:14, red and blue lights appeared at the end of the driveway. I exhaled slowly, relief twined with satisfaction. The patrol car pulled up behind the moving truck and stopped. An officer stepped out, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a steady posture. She walked toward the porch just as one of the movers carried a box toward the truck. "Morning," she called. "Can I ask what's going on here?" Clara stepped out of the house, her expression flickering from surprise to practiced charm. "Good morning, officer. Just moving some furniture. Nothing to worry about." "This is private property," the officer said. "Do you have authorization to be here?" "I own the property," Clara replied confidently. "The deed was transferred to me yesterday." "Can I see proof of that?" the officer asked. Clara handed over the folder, her smile fixed. "Everything's here. Signed and notarized." The officer took the documents and read them carefully, her face neutral. Then she looked up. "Ma'am, according to county records, this property is currently held in trust under a sealed court order filed 2 weeks ago. Any transfer of ownership would require approval from the trustee. Do you have that approval?" Clara's face went pale. "That's impossible. I have the deed. He signed it over to me." "When did he sign it?" the officer asked. "Yesterday. He agreed to everything." The officer glanced at the documents again, then back at her. "These papers show a filing date of 3 days ago. And the notary seal on this signature page doesn't match any registered notary in the state. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step over here and explain how you obtained these." Clara's voice jumped, panic pushing through the smooth veneer. "There must be some mistake. He's confused. She doesn't understand what she signed." "I was helping him," Clara insisted. "Helping him by forging his signature?" the officer asked. "I didn't forge anything," she snapped. "He's an old man. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. Ask anyone in town. He's been forgetting things, leaving doors unlocked. I was trying to protect his assets." The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, you're on private property without permission, in possession of forged documents, and directing the removal of items that don't belong to you. That's trespassing and attempted theft at the very least." "He gave me permission." "Then where is he?" the officer asked. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she'd boxed herself in. That was my cue. I stood, pulled on my robe, tied it at the waist, and walked through the quiet house toward the front door. My hands were steady, my breathing even. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, teacup in hand, as if I'd simply woken early. "Good morning, Clara," I said softly. Every head turned. The movers froze mid-step. The officer glanced between us. And Clara stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. "You're supposed to be gone," she whispered. "Gone where?" I asked gently. "This is my home. Why would I leave?" Her mouth opened, then shut again, no words forming. Color drained from her face as the truth sank in. She'd been caught. "Mr. Hale," the officer said, stepping forward, "are you the owner of this property?" "I am. And I never gave this woman permission to enter my home or remove anything from it." The officer turned to Clara. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for trespassing, forgery, and attempted fraud. I'm going to need you to come with me." "No," Clara said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. He's confused. He doesn't remember signing the papers. I was trying to help." "I remember everything," I said calmly, "including the fact that I never signed a single document you brought me, and that you forged my signature on papers you filed behind my back." Clara's eyes flashed with fury. She took a step toward me, but the officer immediately moved between us. "You set me up," Clara hissed. This whole thing was a trap. I met her eyes, steady and quiet. No, Clara, you built your own trap. I just made sure someone was watching when you walked into it. The movers didn't wait for further instructions. They backed away immediately. Within minutes they were packing their equipment, apologizing over and over, and pulling away in their truck. Gravel scattered behind their tires as they left. Clara remained on the porch, trembling, anger and panic twisting across her face. She clutched her purse tightly, searching for any escape she could invent. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't prove anything. Those documents are legitimate." The officer lifted her radio. "I need backup and someone from the fraud division. We have forged documents and an attempted property theft." "Forged?" Clara's voice rose sharply. "I didn't forge anything. He signed them, he just doesn't remember." I took a slow sip of my tea. "I remember everything, Clara. Every conversation, every document you brought. Every signature you traced without my permission. And I have proof." Her eyes widened. "Proof?" I gestured toward the camera above the porch light. "This property has been under surveillance for weeks. Every visit you made, every word you said, including the day you broke in using the key you stole from my garden shed." The color drained completely from her face. "You recorded me?" "I recorded someone entering my property without permission and claiming ownership," I said quietly. "Yes." A second patrol car pulled up, and moments later, a silver sedan I recognized immediately stopped behind it. Ruth stepped out, briefcase in hand, her expression calm but firm. She walked up the porch steps, nodded to the officer, then turned to me. "Victor, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." Ruth opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, handing it to the officer. "Here are the trust documents and the sealed court order protecting Mr. Hale's property. Any supposed transfer of ownership is void. We also have evidence of signature forgery, identity theft, and attempted elder financial exploitation." The officer flipped through the pages, her expression growing more serious with each one. "This is extensive." "We've been building this case for weeks," Ruth said. "Mr. Hale suspected fraud and came to me for protection. Everything we've done has been entirely by the book." Clara turned to Ruth, desperation rising in her voice. "He's a lonely old man who doesn't understand what he signed. I was helping him. Samuel wanted me to help." "My son wanted no such thing," I said softly. "You manipulated him the same way you tried to manipulate me. But he'll see the truth soon enough." Ruth lifted another sheet from her folder. "This is the notary seal used on the forged documents. The registration number doesn't exist. The notary listed denies ever meeting Mr. Hale or witnessing any signatures. A report has already been filed with the county prosecutor." The second officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to come with us for questioning." Clara's composure finally crumbled. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll call my lawyer. I'll call Samuel." "You're welcome to make any calls from the station," the officer said calmly. "But right now, you need to come with us." They escorted her to the patrol car. She turned once more, her eyes locking with mine. The anger was still there. But beneath it, undeniable fear. The realization that she'd lost. "This is your fault," Clara said, her voice breaking. "You did this. You set me up." I stepped to the edge of the porch, my voice steady and clear. "I protected myself from someone who tried to take everything I own. You built this trap, Clara. Every lie you told, every document you forged, every rumor you spread. All I did was make sure there were witnesses when you finally showed who you really are." She opened her mouth to fire back, but the officer guided her into the patrol car. The door shut, and moments later, they drove away. The driveway grew quiet except for birds beginning their morning chatter. Ruth stood beside me, watching the taillights disappear down the road. "You did well," she said softly. "Not everyone has the courage to fight back." "I'm a teacher," I said. "I've dealt with manipulation before, Just never from family. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. I'll handle the legal side from here. The prosecutor will likely charge her with fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. With the evidence we have, she'll face serious consequences. What about Samuel? Ruth's expression softened. That's up to you. But he deserves to know the truth. I nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation that lay ahead. Ruth left soon after, promising to call with updates. I went back inside, locked the door, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The cabin felt different, lighter, as if a shadow had finally lifted. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the camera footage one last time, making sure everything was backed up. Then I called Samuel. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Dad, it's barely 7. Is everything okay?" "We need to talk," I said gently. "Can you come to the cabin today?" "What's wrong?" "Just come, please. It's important." After a pause, he said, "Okay. I'll leave in an hour." He arrived around 10 o'clock, parking in the driveway and walking toward the door with concern etched on his face. I let him in, made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table. "Where's Clara?" he asked, glancing around as if expecting her to appear. "She won't be coming," I said. "Samuel, I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, without defending her. Can you do that?" His brow tightened. "Dad, what happened?" So I told him everything. The forged documents, the lies, the attempt to steal the property, the cameras, the recordings, the police. At first, he didn't believe me. He shook his head, argued, insisted there had to be a mistake. But when I showed him the footage, when he heard Clara claiming the property, saw her moving through my home, watched her break in, and compared the forged signature to my real one, his face slowly collapsed. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Dad, I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, reaching across the table and taking his hand. "She fooled both of us at first. I just saw through it before it was too late." Tears filled his eyes. "I should have listened to you. When you tried to tell me something was wrong, I brushed it off. I thought you were being overprotective." "You loved her," I said gently. "That's not a crime. Trusting people is a good quality. She just took advantage of it." "What happens now?" "She'll face charges," I said. "And you'll decide what comes next for you. But Samuel, you're my son. Nothing she did changes that. You're not responsible for her choices." He stayed for hours. We talked. He cried. He apologized over and over until I finally told him to stop. By the time he left, the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains. He hugged me tightly at the door, promised to call every day, and drove off with red eyes, but a straighter spine than when he'd arrived. I stood on the porch as the sky turned pink and gold, watching the colors sweep across the peaks, colors that never grew old no matter how many times I saw them. The air was cool, the mountains were quiet, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. I'd won, not by being loud or harsh or cruel, but by being patient, thoughtful, and using the skills forged through decades of teaching, observing, and understanding people. Clara had underestimated me because of my age. She assumed I was weak, confused, easy to manipulate. She'd been wrong about all of it. I turned back into the cabin, closed the door softly, and allowed myself a small smile. 6 weeks later, the court proceedings ended. Clara entered a plea agreement, admitting to forgery, attempted fraud, and trespassing in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received 2 years probation, community service, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. The fake notary she'd used faced separate charges. The investigation showed she'd been running a quiet operation forging documents for clients willing to pay. Clara had found her through an online forum and paid $3,000 for the falsified paperwork. Samuel filed for divorce 3 weeks after that morning on the porch. It was handled quietly, through lawyers, with minimal contact. He called me once during that time, sounding exhausted. "I keep thinking about the signs I missed," he said. How she isolated me from you. How she always had an answer ready before I even asked. You were in love, I told him gently. Love makes us see what we want to see. That's not weakness, it's human. I'm sorry, Dad. I know. And I forgive you, I said. Now you have to forgive yourself. By early autumn, Samuel had moved into a new apartment closer to the mountains. We started having dinner together once a week, slowly rebuilding the closeness we'd lost during the months when Clara controlled the narrative. Samuel seemed lighter now, freer, like someone who'd been carrying a weight he didn't realize was there until it finally lifted. As for me, I made a decision that even surprised myself. I kept thinking about people like me, older folks living alone, owning property, with assets they'd spent their lives building. People who could be targeted by those who saw vulnerability instead of strength. So I began volunteering at a local resource center in town, teaching workshops on financial protection and recognizing manipulation. I called the sessions Safeguarding Your Future, and they filled up within days. I taught them how to recognize elder exploitation, how to protect their assets through trusts, how to document everything, how to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. And every time I saw relief in their eyes, heard the gratitude in their voices, I knew I'd turned something painful into something useful. Spring arrived early the next year. Snow melted from the roof in steady drips, and wildflowers pushed through the softening earth. The mountains glowed gold in the morning sun, and the air smelled clean and new. I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching mist rise from the trees and feeling the warmth of the sunrise on my face. My phone buzzed, a text from Samuel. He said he was coming for dinner that weekend and wanted to bring fresh trout he'd caught. I smiled and typed back a reply. Life had returned to what it should have been all along. Peaceful, simple, mine. I found myself thinking about that morning when Clara stood on my porch, absolutely certain she'd won, and the look on her face when she realized I'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. People think revenge has to be loud, dramatic, explosive. But I learned something different. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just signs the right papers. I took another sip of tea as the mountains stretched endlessly before me, and I felt nothing but gratitude for the quiet strength that had carried me through. Let me know in the comments where you have watched it from and if you liked my story. It inspires us to share more such stories with you.